welcome to the TDWG podcast. My name is Paul Davidson.
And my name is Scott Norman.
And as you heard me say in the intro song, we are going to be answering a YouTube comment. Woo.
Whoa.
So, the YouTube comment that we're answering, do not worry, we will eventually do a review of Fahrenheit 451 for all of my students that used to read that book at one point. You can roll your eyes now. But here's the question that we're going to answer that was posed to us in the YouTube comments. And do not worry, also, we will be doing a suggestion box episode come 2020.
Yes.
So the question is, what would teaching be like if each teacher every year was assigned a new role?
Woof.
It would be very stressful for everybody involved. It'd be interesting. It would be a very interesting scenario. I think teaching would be a very different profession.
It would be. It would require, I guess, a different type of person, and not necessarily in a good way. I'm not sure.
It would require a lot more people like me, which is definitely not a good thing.
I just for clarification on Woof. Have you ever seen Home Alone?
Oh yeah.
Was his girlfriend Woof?
I've seen Home Alone.
Yeah,
yes.
that's not a compliment when you say Woof. All right, but my deal is just that it doesn't hit me well because I have seen districts that are riddled with turnover, and it doesn't have a good impact on the structure of the school or the kids.
Yeah, there's it would not allow any stability to take place.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, even though craziness can be fun sometimes, stability does end up helping out longer along the road.
Craziness doesn't seem like craziness anymore when it's the norm.
So why does this not happen, Mr. Norman?
Here's why it doesn't happen. Basically what we just said, and that is that it would not be good for school structure. Also because in order for someone to be able to properly teach something, you have to actually be certified in that area. So for instance, I went to college and learned for several years social studies, and I got the breadth and depth of knowledge required so that when I showed up at a school, if they handed me an economics textbook and said, teach this, I would know what I was talking about for most of it.
You would know where to find the important stuff on
yeah.
it. And you have become an expert in the field.
Yes, and that is not saying, that I'm an absolute expert in every social studies topic, but what it means is I'm expert enough to teach on every social studies topic that I have been trained in. And it's one of those things that you don't really realize until you recognize a teacher who has not been trained. Everybody's had the teacher, and I had one in high school. He was a very nice guy. He was not trained to teach what he was trying to teach. It was a train wreck. It was a very polite train wreck, but it was a train wreck.
And here's where I have to give a shout out to our mentor, Dr. Fridley.
He's moving on.
I know. I saw that.
I'm sad.
I saw that. He's no longer going to be at SEMO.
He's
so
not the godfather
no one's going to be
anymore.
able to follow our footsteps. But I got to give a shout out to Dr. Fridley.
Absolutely.
He taught us about UBD, Understanding by Design, and I feel like the way that he went about teaching UBD, backwards design, Understanding by Design, the way he taught about that, I feel like if push came to shove and I was asked to teach something different,
Yeah.
I could do it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would do it that well, but if you give me enough time, I could read through something, I could distill it down, and I could figure out what we need to do that is important. But that would take a lot more time on my part,
Yes.
where I have spent all this time investing, all this time hammering away, trying to figure out what is important for English, and it's taken me 9 years. Like you mentioned, my degree's in social studies education. That's what I got all my training in, and I've just now, within the last 2-ish years, feel like I have a firm grasp on, this is how English needs to be taught.
Yeah.
And up until then, it was just me really scrambling and trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what is the thing that makes it work. And I'm just now finally clicking and figuring out, this is what needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you hear the comparison. I don't know if you've ever actually heard it. I have heard the comparison, but there is a comparison to coaching, in the sense that if you look at franchises like something like the Browns, right, and they've had 1 million coaches and 1 million quarterbacks, and then you see a team like Steelers or Patriots somewhere that has had all the exact same trials, except
they've had stability.
They've had the same coach. They've had the same owner. They've had the same people picking players. And even though they go through all of the other exact same problems, they're able to overcome it because they know what they're doing in their spot. And so I've been teaching social studies now for 7 years, and in those 7 years, every year I look back at the previous year and there's like 3 or 4 things where I'm like, oh, that was dumb. I'm going to fix that. If you're cycling from subject to subject.
Yeah, you don't have time to do that.
Yeah, because you have to teach them differently. Like, you cannot teach social studies the same way you teach math.
No.
Like, you just can't. It's not the same thing. Now, there are aspects of it that are transferable, but if somebody came in and tried to teach social studies as if it was a math class, sit down, let's practice over and over and over again the same type of formula, that doesn't work for social studies because it's all about analysis and thinking and
Yep.
trying to read and, rephrase and rethink.
And I feel like that's also part of the reason why I was able to actually transfer over to English somewhat successfully, is because
Yes.
there is some overlap between, we're both humanities teachers. That's social studies and ELA are. They're the humanities.
Yeah.
Just one focuses on one area of the humanities and one focuses on the other. And so I feel like that is the reason why I'm one of those few people that was able to make one of those jumps, but I'm not making a jump from English to science or English to math. If forced to, I could try to figure out and make it work. I don't know if it would be successful. It'd be interesting. It would be stressful for me.
Yeah.
But it would not necessarily be as effective as someone who dedicated their lives, who is an expert and actually deeply, deeply loves their subject matter, as the people that actually go into those fields.
Yeah, you guys can't see, but as he was talking, I did the little synergy hand thing where you link your fingers together. But it's our two fields are overlapping to the point where my EOC is turning into an English test.
Your standards are turning into English standards.
Turning into English standards, yeah. And so
I've went to professional development training that was intended for both English teachers and social studies teachers.
Yeah, and I've been looking over the stuff, and I actually have just started explaining to my kids this year, just straight up listen, guys, look at this test question. Have I taught you this information? And they're like, no, you haven't taught us this information. I said, you know why? It's not in your standards.
Nope.
But they're asking you the question because they know it's not in your standards, which means you haven't been taught it, which means you have to read this paragraph, read this graph, analyze them, and answer the question. So what they're really testing you on is your ability to analyze the text, not to memorize things. And so those two areas are very close together. And so if you had teachers who were teaching at the same time English and social studies, or maybe even chemistry and a few math classes, those things where they're closely linked together, maybe that makes sense. And you do see that sometimes. But what would not make as much sense is at a high school or above level. I understand elementary teachers, hats off to you, elementary teachers. You have to teach a lot of things.
But that's a different monster that you're dealing with.
Yes, it's an entirely different structure. It's an entirely different depth. And so you are instilling basics. You're not doing huge deep dives that take weeks at a time into each one. Now, you might be, and once again, hats off to you, I don't 100% know what I'm talking about with elementary, which is why I shouldn't be rotated into an elementary position, which is, the question. And so I would say overall, why does it not happen? Because thankfully in education, we have figured out how to allow people to specialize in order to become better at the specific thing that they are good at, or to become good at the area in which they are teaching. And if you have movement, you have the Browns.
And so let's move on to the second half. What would it be like? So if it actually was that way, how would it? What would your class be like if you? All right. So if you all of us, they gave me the example of chemistry. So if I was a chemistry teacher, what would I do? Well, first thing I would do is just find a chemistry textbook and find the chemistry standards and strip them down to what is the bare essentials that they need to know.
Yeah.
So that's how I'd go about that. And then I would try to figure out a way to do hands-on learning with whatnot. I tried to do that with the text, even though it seems like we're not doing anything crazy. This is English class. We're reading and writing, so we need to interact with these ideas and express these ideas. I would do the same thing, but then try to find experiments that actually back up those particular big ideas at the center of chemistry.
Yeah, so let's just make this interesting, and so that it is like this scenario, give me a subject.
Okay.
So that I have to react live to whatever subject I am being thrown into.
You are now the music teacher.
Oh, gosh.
And Hendrix is now the PE teacher.
That would be amusing. I think Hendrix might be able to translate because he's already marching people all over a field. I am so sorry for what the music is going to sound like under me as band teacher, but oof. So first off,
Don't worry, next year you'll be a foreign language teacher.
Okay, I would actually be okay with foreign language.
But right now you're a band teacher.
Yeah. So as a band, oh no.
Don't worry, I'm going to be shipped down to 3rd grade, so
I would watch that as a TV show.
Yeah, that's actually, believe it or not, the most important of all the teaching positions is 3rd grade, believe it or not, because that's the first year that kids get a standardized test, and that's whenever you see kids start turning off from school.
Yep, so got to keep them engaged.
Yep.
But I would say, as a music teacher, obviously the first thing that I would do is I would pick up all of the equivalent of the First Days of Teaching by Harry K. Wong, but for music teachers. And I would just I'd read, like all summer, I'd just be reading and trying to teach myself because, very honestly, I have a good friend of mine who is a brilliant musician. He can pick up pretty much any instrument and play it, and he was sitting there a couple nights ago and attempting to explain to me all of these things that he found so cool that he was learning in college about guitar. So he's sitting here playing this thing, and he's like, yeah, see, like, if you lead into this note, that's not on the scale, but you're breaking the rule. Can't you tell I'm breaking? I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he goes, well, just listen to this. And plays it. And he's like, does that sound right? And I was like, well, no. And he goes, and then plays another note. And he's like, now did it sound right? And I'm like, well, yeah. And he goes, here's why. And starts explaining all this music theory. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So
it sounds interesting, but I don't know what's going on.
It was like, this sounds really cool. I'm just completely lost. And so I would have trouble, honestly, and here's why this could be a bad thing. My first year as a music teacher would be me teaching sight reading of notes. And that would be a majority of the year. Sight read this. Here's what these, I would be teaching not even music theory. I would just be teaching the scales, and then I would be teaching how to find those scales on your instrument.
And then all of that hard work that you've done would be replaced because then you'd be a Spanish teacher.
Correct. And by the end of the year, my entire band could play one rendition of Hot Cross Buns. And
while I would be fired because the building would catch on fire from my chemistry class.
Yeah, now
many volcanoes.
I have shouted out my chemistry teacher, my physics teacher before. He legit did stuff that could have caught buildings on fire, and it was amazing. So, you might turn out to be a great chemistry teacher. But
although I would be fired because the building would burn down.
Yeah, because you burned the building down. But yeah, so that's the deal is, you heard, if you are anyone who knows anything about music and you heard what I'm teaching, that's missing a lot of the major points of music.
And I will say that the thought experiment is a good one because sometimes it would be beneficial to get out of your own mindset when it comes to that and see from a different perspective. And so I do feel like there would be something beneficial if us teachers started like observing not within our content area but other content areas and seeing how they go about that, and it might spark different ideas about how we might teach our own content. But I don't think it would be a good idea for me to be a science teacher.
Yeah.
Unless I needed to. If I needed to be a science teacher, I would do it. But it wouldn't be nearly as effective as me being an English teacher.
Yeah, and I think that it would be a great thing. And actually, I've thought about, because we have student teachers incoming, on days where, like I'm giving him an hour and letting him do it, going just sitting in another class and be like, let's see how this person teaches. Not so that I can critique them, but so that I can learn. So I can be like, oh, I have not thought about doing that.
And
that
you
way.
can see like, oh, Johnny acts like that in every class.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It's not just mine. He acts like that in every class.
Or there's the opposite.
Oh, and
of that.
Sally just always talks to every single class. Got it.
Yeah, but then there is also the reckoning if you sit in the other class and they act like angels and you go, what am I doing wrong? But yeah, so there you go. I think that answers the question, because the initial question was what would happen if? Mm-hmm. It would be worse for your education. It would be an eye-opening experience for us.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. So that was a good question, though. We got a nice little episode out of it. So if anybody else that is listening has any questions similar to that, put them in the comments. Like the suggestions box, yeah, we will burn through those every once in a while. But if you want us to get something right in front of us and sizzle and make us be like, all right, we got to do an episode over that, mention it in the comments of the YouTube. If you're listening to us on Spotify, type in the YouTube, find us, and go jump on in and start commenting.
Yeah, we are TDWG Podcast anywhere. And I would say, specifically, if you have teaching questions, we will begin to, as we move into this year, tip our hand more and more towards something new that is coming that will be quick hits on teaching questions for use specifically by people who are either, just curious or in teaching or interested in becoming teachers. So
exactly. So more like this, except more professional instead of just the crazy what if that we just went.
Off the wall goofiness.
Off the cuff type of podcast.
Yeah.
But until next time, I think that will do it, Mr. Norman. So my name's been Paul Davidson.
My name is, and Lord willing will be, Scott Norman.
And we've been two
Dumb Woke Guys.